This is the Wandering Mike.
Welcome everyone to the Wandering Mike. Today I'm here with Neil. Hey Neil, how's it going?
Hello, I'm fine. How are you?
Pretty good. It's been a beautiful day here. Um, yeah, so to get us started in our little conversation today, if you just want to introduce yourself to the people, tell us a little bit about your life, your journey, what has it been like?
Sure. I mean, that's a lot to throw at one person at one time, but I'll try to break that down accordingly. My name is Neil Laird. I'm a TV producer of documentaries as well as a novelist. I'm calling in from Brooklyn, but I've traveled all over the world doing films and writing books, 70 some countries, over 1,000 hours of television for National Geographic, Discovery, BBC, all those kind of people, mostly focusing on adventure, travel, archaeology, lost civilizations and history. And then recently I've transitioned using all those experiences behind the scenes to write a series of fantastical time travel books, which is about a film crew who goes into the past and see these things when they're bright and shiny and new. So two of those books are already out, one on Pompeii and one on ancient Egypt.
All right. Well, that sounds so interesting. Let's just actually get started with that. Um, so, what was it that got you interested in lost civilizations? What was it that you were focusing on the past? What got you so interested?
It's funny, growing up in a small town in Pennsylvania, I didn't really know anything about ancient history. I went to a small Catholic school. So the only history we got was, Jesus and the four gospels and all that kind of stuff. And so I didn't know too much about the rest of that time period until I went to New York in college. I went to film school, and like most film students, you're so full of yourself. You think you're going to get out and right away get a job making some multi-billion-dollar motion picture with your bachelor's of arts degree, and we all run to New York City, and that doesn't happen. So I spent a lot of time between jobs, a lot of things to do. I didn't have much money to do it. And so one day I wandered to the New York Public Library. I think because it was free and it was air conditioned. It was blazingly hot that day. And for whatever reason, I was wandering the shelf and I wandered towards history. And I picked up this book off the shelf, this old tome about the rise of man, the rise of early cultures, back to cave periods and Neolithic periods. I didn't know any of that stuff when I was growing up. I just didn't get it. I was a voracious reader, but I kind of knew more recent history. And there was something about those ancient cultures, particularly Egypt, Rome, and Greece, that just fascinated me on the spot. And I'm still fascinated today. We're talking 35 years ago, whenever this happened, mid 80s, early 80s, or whenever it happened. And I am still driven by that stuff today. And pretty much everything I've done since then, since picking up that book on the shelf, has been informed by the ancient world, particularly the Middle East, and getting back there and seeing it and writing it and making films. All my career has pretty much been an excuse to have somebody to pay me to go back to those places rather than backpack myself. But we talked about backpacking slightly before we started chatting, and certainly the big eye opener really was after I mean, the key piece I didn't mention, per our discussion on travel was I became so enamored of these ancient cultures that I got so tired of just waiting for the next job not to happen that I decided to backpack. I was about 22, 23, something like that. This was the early 90s. And I knew I wanted to go to Egypt, and I got whatever little money I had, and I flew over. I had no real return ticket. And I ended up backpacking for about 9 months. I went to I flew into Israel, went down to Egypt, went to Syria, Jordan, Turkey, and eventually got to Iran, which is pretty impressive for an American passport holder. But at that time, it was a little open, and I was able to sneak through the door before it closed again. And I can tell you, those were the most wonderful 9 months of my life. I came back high as a kite, wondering again how I can get back there on the dime, someone else's dime, and on the regular. And that's what I've been doing ever since. I went back to film school, grad school for documentary. I made my first documentary about the Great Sphinx of Egypt because I knew some people who were restoring it. And I spent 5 or 6 months just following the stonemasons around, and they try to save the Great Sphinx of Giza, and got a chance to spend time with them and go in secret passageways under the Sphinx and under the pyramids and all these wonderful things that wouldn't have been open to me otherwise. And I was lucky to sell the film to Discovery Channel, and I've been doing that ever since. So that's kind of takes you up to how I got into the business. It really was just my own passion, picking up that one book off a shelf and just sort of leaping before I looked.
Yeah. I feel like that's the dream, isn't it? Like finding something you're genuinely passionate about and then getting someone to pay you to do it, being able to monetize it.
Yeah. Yeah. I lucked out in that regard. And even if how I found it and I was able to figure out what do you do with it? Okay, so you're a kid who's into ancient Egypt. What the hell do you do with that? So I was fortunate
Yeah.
that all these things just kind of lined up. It's like, oh, I can make documentaries about it. And I found that I really loved the art form and I love documentaries. I thought I was going to do feature films. I was always
Mm.
enamored of watching movies when I was a kid. The big classic, the Seven Samurais and such. I love the big epics, historical epics. But then when I got the documentary, I love the nimbleness of it. When you're in a film crew, it's only you. It's usually a four-person crew. You, a camera
Yeah.
person, a sound engineer, and a fixer, or an assistant, and then producer. That's all you need. Unlike, yeah, I walked by a film here in Union Square on the way to this interview in New York City, and there was probably like 10,000 extras sitting around a huge crane and a
Right.
bunch of people barking orders. I'm sure they all get paid more than I do, but we can go places they can't. We are stealth.
Yes. Um, so you did a lot of different things and looked into a lot of different documentaries. What is it that you're trying to portray to the people the most? Is there like a certain aspect about these old cultures that you're trying to portray?
It's a good question. I would say one overarching thing that I try to bring to all my films is that sense of excitement that I have. 'Cause a lot of people look at ancient history and they
Right.
roll their eyes. Oh, boring. Who wants to hear about some dead columns in the middle of the desert or some old parchment? Oh, just boring old logs from Moses or whatever they think it is. People have not a lot of people know about the ancient history and they assume it's just because it's old, it's boring and it's distant. And I like to get people excited about it. Not just ancient history. I've done things about medieval history and other periods of history too. Ancient's my favorite, but history is still alive and we still tell those stories. And it's such a treat to be able to take a story no one knew about and bring it to life in a document and get people to care. Well, afterwards, you're saying, I want to fly to Syria. I want to see that. I mean, they didn't
Yeah.
even know Syria was on the map before that. Now they're looking at flights and how to get to Damascus. So it's wonderful to sort of inspire people that way and get them off their butts and realize that we've been around for 5,000 years doing some pretty amazing things. And the more rocks you turn over, the more you realize, oh, it all has been done before. And in many cases, often much better.
Yeah. That's true, isn't it? That's that's a whole interesting topic as well. Um, but it's probably very hard for, especially with all the things you've seen. But is there, talking about excitement, one thing that comes to mind where you were seeing something, you were filming about something, and you were super excited. You were like, "Oh wow, I didn't even know about this."
I mean, there are so many, I suppose. I mean, it's hard to
Right.
say. I've done, again, after 1,000 hours of television, and not all of them are wonderful. There's some dogs on my list, which I won't talk about. You go to my IMDb page, you look and say, oh, he did that groaner. So for every wonderful thing about King Tut, I did a weight loss show, that I had to pay the rent that month. And I was fortunate that mostly I do those kind of films of traveling. And I think it's well, as I said, a personal story. There are many, but I can tell you one. And it was the very first film. And it probably cemented my great joy and recognizing how lucky I was to even be in this position. On that film about the Great Sphinx, I sold it again as my thesis and to the network as an engineering show about the Sphinx falling apart. At that point in the late '90s, the Sphinx was shedding its skin almost. It had these cladding stones on it. They were put there 100 years ago, and they were basically being repelled by the Sphinx because they were just too heavy. They weren't working. So they brought in these local stonemasons to restore the Sphinx theoretically in the way the pharaohs did it. And so there's going to be an engineering show about that. And while I was there, we were shooting. I someone on top of the Sphinx, my cameraman, and we're literally on the head of the Sphinx. And we're shooting these workers with planks, bringing in cement and mortar. And someone called and said, there's a discovery. There's a discovery at the bottom of the hill. Come quickly. And because we were there, we followed. We didn't ask them to film this or not. We just followed with our camera. And what had happened was the bottom of the Giza Plateau. Now, have you been to Giza? Have you been to
Once,
Egypt?
very
Yeah.
young.
Well, if for those who don't know, Giza Plateau, of course, is where the three great pyramids are outside of Cairo,
Yeah.
and they're extremely high, but they're also all the more dramatic because they're on a plateau. And then down below is a bunch of crevices, and that's used to be a village, and nobody knew what it was. It was just long falling apart because it was mud brick. But this day, a woman was riding a horse there. They used to have stables down there for the tourists, and she was taking her horse back to stable, and the horse fell through a hole in the sand all the way up
Oh,
to its leg. They
oh,
pulled the
wow.
horse up and they realized this horse had fallen into an ancient tomb, 4,500 years old, that no one had ever found before. And it was a
Right.
tomb, they later found out, by the workers who built the Sphinx and the pyramids. It was an entire necropolis, an entire cemetery, heretofore unknown until this day, of the workers who built the Sphinx, the very thing that I was making a film about the restoration of. And I was there when they opened one of these tombs. And they're very modest tombs, not like a King Tut tomb or Ramsay the Great tomb. They're little beehive tombs. They were cut into the living rock. They're often just made of mud and dabble of mud brick. And it was each one contained one person in the fetal position, not mummified, because only the rich could be mummified. They could afford mummification.
Mm.
Everybody else was just got chucked in there. But they also had two pots next to them. There were two little clay pots. It might have in the normal times it would be called a canopic jar where they took the organs to the next world. Thinking back and now, it probably wasn't that because they were mummified. It was probably just their whatever they want to take, some beer with them, their favorite candy, a hunk of meat, whatever they wanted in the next life was next to them, cuddled up there like a little doggy. And it was an amazing experience first because when we opened it up, all this hot air rushed out. This like vacuum sealed air that had been in there 4.5 millennia just came racing past us. And I could even feel my face getting flush because this air that had been trapped there, think about that, before recorded time from the pyramid age suddenly came out and all the fresh air went in. And that was a bad thing because as we were sitting there setting up our shots, we're talking, we're looking, we're taking some notes. We looked down at the clay jars and they both cracked in pieces. They sat there
Oh,
untouched for 4,500 years. But as soon as we, as the explorers, as the modern world, brought in our modern air and our modern
yeah.
trappings, they crumbled. They were perfectly preserved until the day we opened them. And that's when I realized, A, how privileged it is to be there at the moment, but also how fleeting it all is. You look away, look back, it's all gone. So archaeology and that kind of preservation, I try to bring that to my films too. And quite often the networks very much want us to rush in there and get a mummy's tomb and open it up because gets good ratings. And as much as I can do for my purpose as a network exec, I try to tell them to slow down, talk to the archaeologists because we don't need any more mummies. So we don't need any more tombs and behind glass. We know a lot. If there's something special about it, let's open it up. But if we think it's just another mummy from the 21st dynasty and it's better for the next generation to open it when you have better safeguarding techniques, leave it there.
Right.
And I think I learned that firsthand in my very first shoot. Archaeology is destruction.
So, yeah, that's an
I don't know what
interesting
I don't know
insight.
what your question was. That's where I ended up. I'm sorry if I went down a rabbit.
No, that was perfect. That was a perfect story as well. Um, yeah, that last part was just so interesting. We never really think about because we're so eager to discover that we're actually destroying and discovering. So that's good
Yeah,
to
we
keep in
don't
mind.
need. Look, it's wonderful to say when it's being destroyed. There are so many tombs. I mentioned Egypt because I've shot there dozens of times, but you can say the same thing about the other places in the world. The Maya civilizations. Now that we have LIDAR, we're finding a lot of ruins in the jungles of Central America. And they're kind of festooned under foliage. As soon as we pull it up and the rainwater gets back in there, they're gone. So the question is, do we need another stela, from 18 Rabbit of this dynasty that's going to solve something? We want history, we want to solve history. But if it's just to pop up and crop up in a museum, isn't it better just keep it in situ, covered until we're ready to use it? It's a tough question because we want to be Indiana Jones. We want to be the one that finds the golden amulet and bring it back and put it in museums so people can see it around the world. I mean, everyone should see King Tut's past. I'm not saying archaeology is a bad thing, but I do know that in television, we always had the balance of what's right and what's ratings. And not surprisingly, often ratings wins out.
Yeah, unfortunately, it does.
Yeah.
Um, I don't really know a lot about the bureaucracy as well of archaeology, but I'm just thinking as I think about documentaries and especially nature documentaries, which I enjoy watching. If you film these kind of films, often you expecting to see something specific and you can't really catch at the moment what it is you're looking for because you're playing with real life. Is that a struggle that you have in archaeology as well, trying to find the things you're trying to film?
No, I mean, in archaeology, in a way, is kind of the opposite. Well, I guess in wildlife too, which I haven't done that much of. You waited for it. You wait for the gazelle to be killed by the tiger, and you hope it happens on the 6 day budget you have. Otherwise, you're going to
Right.
buy another day and wait. You know, with archaeology, it's the same thing. I've been on shoots where nothing happens. We don't find it. I did a big
Mm.
2 budget hour special about looking for Nefertiti's tomb in the Valley of the Queens a few years ago. And the director who was finding it, an Egyptian archaeologist, was absolutely convinced he would find Nefertiti. Now, Nefertiti was the wife of Ramsay the Great and one of the most, or Nefertari, and one of the most famous queens of all time. And we didn't find it. So we made a 2 hour documentary by finding nothing because we had spent our money. We had to do something. So you find other things to do. You have to pivot when you're in the field. If you don't find something, you look at the potsherds, you talk about it, and you go to a museum and you talk about context. You talk about what it's like to dig in that 130-degree heat, all that stuff. So you find ways to keep the show going. And then sometimes you luck out like that first one where a horse falls through a tomb, and then suddenly you have a whole new story you didn't plan on, which is much better than the one you came for. So it goes
Yes,
both ways.
I was just thinking. So, um, is I don't know, a percentage is probably not possible, but like in your opinion, a lot of documentaries, like how much of the stuff do you feel like is coming from this, or we're just making it up in the moment? And maybe sometimes you get, like you said, even the better stories than what you initially planned out.
I can put a percentage on it. I mean, certainly, one of the great non-mysteries, I suppose, of television, if you watch enough, you know this is that it's heavily scripted sometimes. And it's not scripted down to the words. No, I don't do reality TV. I'm lucky to avoid the whole Housewives of Las Vegas kind of thing. That's not my bailiwick. I applaud those who do it, and they do it well. It's just not my thing. But those kind of reality shows are what they call them assisted reality, which is a total oxymoron. And that just means that it's reality, but we're creating it as we go. We're scripting it. In
Right.
television, you kind of have to do that even with an archaeology show. So let's say I just did a show in Turkey about Troy last year. Let's say,
Hmm.
we're going to look for some lost tomb they think could be Achilles' tomb on the outside of Troy. We only have 6 days to do it. Now we do our research and we spend our money, we get our fixers, or you might go to a recognizance shoot to look around first, but then you're only there for 6 days. So you have to kind of get it then. So therefore you have to kind of create what you're going to do day by day. You can't wing it. You can't just sit there and let life play itself out. It's just too bloody expensive to do that. You're there
Right.
with a big crew and you're getting expensive permits and drones cost money. And it's just you can't just wait for a tomb to reveal itself because often they don't. So a lot of times you kind of I mean, budget's the wrong word. It's you kind of have to already know where you're ending up before you go there. And then you create the breadcrumbs that leads you to your discovery that is supposed to be in the moment, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Um,
Not
you
not
actually
always,
mentioned
but
something
sometimes you gotta do that, yeah.
that I didn't really think about, but now that you said permits, is that mostly is that a question of money most of the time? So is it actually difficult to get permits on some other merits just to film somewhere, or is it basically just about?
It's cost prohibitive. I'd say the two most expensive places I ever filmed at, and maybe the fame on the world, at least in the archaeology world, are without a doubt Egypt and Pompeii. You want to go there, don't quote me, thousands of dollars a day or whatever. And it's like, you can't just go to Pompeii and just put your camera down and just hope it gets something. You have to block it out by the hour or whatever. Because to Italy's credit, Pompeii is a huge archaeological tourist site and they make money off it. And they know that you're making money off of coming over here and making a film about Pompeii. So the costs are exorbitant. So therefore, the amateur filmmaker can't do it. It has to be a
Right,
BBC or Channel 4 or Geographic or PBS because, if you want to be there for several days, you got to make sure you have the cash to do it. And you can't really sneak it. You could go guerrilla filmmaking, but A, they'll probably catch you, and B, it won't look nearly as good. I certainly have done that in many shows where I pretended to be a
right,
tourist and I'm there getting a way too studied hand shot of some ancient church. And it's pretty clear I'm not just a tourist from Pittsburgh, that I'm there on a mission. So you have to
right.
be kind of very sneaky around that. But yeah, it costs money. All these things cost money, and Egypt is so expensive to shoot. To go back to there, merely because what does Egypt have? When you think of Egypt, you think of the pyramids, you think of the mummies.
Yeah,
That is why Egypt is on the map still. I always say you take
right.
the mummies out of Egypt, it's just Libya. Who goes to Libya, right? So they're making money off of what they got. That's their cash grab,
Of course. Yeah.
and more power to them for doing it. I would too.
Yeah, it's such a I mean, there is a reason why it's still like is so interesting to people to this day because you just look at those buildings that they put up and you just have to wonder and you're like, oh wow.
Oh,
To
I mean,
this
that's
day
I do
it's
that all the
crazy.
time. I stand the pyramid so many times, I still not get it. I still can't believe not only they're still standing after 400,000 years, but they built the bloody thing to begin with. It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's enormous. And it's like, what was going to me, that's what fascinates me. Going back to your early question about what fascinates me about ancient history. I get very, very irate very quickly when people start saying it was aliens that did it, that it was levitation, that it was, some sort of paranormal experience they got help. No, it was people who just knew what they were doing and they had a concerted energy and they brought it together. And whatever reason they did it, we may think it's crazy today, but to them, building a pyramid that high into the sky was the most important thing for them. And whether people were slaves or not, or whether they were died along the way, I won't question all the, the sidebars of what happened. But the people who claim that it was done by help from aliens are just looking, it's lazy. It's lazy thinking. It's much more interesting to look at why we did it rather than who helped us.
Yeah. And you already hinted at it before as well. So I actually do want to go into that. Because you mentioned that these civilizations might have done some things better than we do nowadays, that they just got stuff figured out to a different degree. Um, in your opinion, what do you think? I mean, if we go to Egypt, especially, but these anti uh, colonizations, like people, what do you think um, was their motivation? And or how was the society and total like constructed? What led them to thrive so they did?
Want to let them to try these things. I mean, that's the great mystery. I think that's why people always want to find that papyrus scroll and try to answer those questions. What was going through their mind? And we'll never know what's going through the mind of somebody, 5,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. But the more I see of this stuff, the more I recognize how similar they are. I don't think they had any greater intellect. I don't think that civilization has advanced exponentially since then. I think they had different things that drove them. Religion obviously was overriding. They didn't have the separation of church and state. Everything was about absolute power. Everything was about for the God, for sun. They didn't have the understanding necessarily of like what the sun was doing and why it was doing it. They knew the solar systems and stuff, which is why they created a lot of the astronomical stuff they did. But why they did it, we don't know.
Or-
But what I can say is, one of the things that I wrote in my book that I learned that I really wanted to bring in is people tend to think that ancient cultures were primitive. If you watch films in the ancient era, you always think they're just like elite eclipse comes out and they all fall to their ground. Like, oh my God, you are a god. Because they haven't seen an eclipse before. They knew what an eclipse was. But socially too, the key thing that I bring into my most recent book, for example, Time Pompeii, or even the first one, Primetime Travelers, is I'm gay. I'm a gay filmmaker. And I came out while I was making my films going around the world. And I mentioned that because going up in a Catholic culture and going around in Muslim countries, you obviously have to be kind of cautious and careful about your
Right.
sexuality and same sex love. Not so in ancient Egypt and Greece and Rome. They were much more advanced than us. If you look at the early cultures, and now we're not talking about engineering anymore. We're talking about how they dealt with love and how they dealt with relationships. They were much more open. There was no word for homosexuality. So for whatever their culture was, that was not an issue. There's a wonderful tomb in Saqqara called the Tomb of the Brothers. And it got that name because when they found it in the 1960s, the homophobic people who found it figured these two men embracing and kissing could have only been brothers if they were
Right.
buried together. No, these were two gay guys who went to eternity together arm in arm. And it's a beautiful, beautiful place. And yet the Egyptians knew that and they wouldn't let these guys be buried next to the Pharaoh's tomb. So the elite knew exactly what kind of relationship it was, and they were fine with it. So it's another example of we think that time marches forward and always doesn't. It's circular and it's pendulum. And sometimes we have advances in medicine. We live a lot longer than they did, but we probably more free to love who we wanted to in ancient Rome or Egypt than we are today in many places. So, we are very similar. We are all just making up as we go along. It's not like we figure one thing out and never look back.
Right. And because now you're writing your books, so with the books, is that one of the main things you want to portray there as well? Just the openness of those cultures,
Yeah,
loving
I do
nature
because
of the culture.
Y the one thing the books are very much rollicking action adventure books. They're the Indiana Jones, but they're parodies because it's about a time traveling TV crew, not unlike the ones I wanted to be on. And they're all
Mm,
kind of a cheesy ancient aliens. They think, they come from a rather cheesy basic cable background. I don't know if they have this in Germany or in Australia, but it's like kind of low end kind of TV shows, but some was like done. So it's this crew that gets swept in the past. And so it's a parody of that, but also too, I wanted to talk about these ancient cultures of sexuality, so I made the two lead characters, the camera woman Kara, I made her a lesbian, and I made her best friend and the director, Jared. He comes out in the first book. And I do that because I want them to meet people along the way in the ancient past, but also kind of deal with themselves and have a personal struggle. In the book I just finished, just came out, Primetime Pompeii. The whole idea of that started from, now, have you been to Pompeii?
no, I have not.
No, gonna put that in your list too. So Pompeii, your question about Pompeii, the eruption, 79 AD, wiped out the town very quickly. So quickly that the victims couldn't escape the pyroclastic flow coming down from Vesuvius because it was coming at 65 miles an hour. It was 1500 degrees. You cannot outrun it. So what happened was when this pyroclastic surge hit them, they evaporated almost instantly, so quickly that when the ash came over them, it hardened. And when archaeologists found them a couple hundred years ago, they found these hollowed out holes in the ground. And they realized by putting plaster in it and chipping it away, you can see the bodies, you can see their last embrace. You can see them reaching, holding coins, running, falling. Most of the bodies are gone. There's some bits and pieces of bones, but in most cases, they're just a hollowed out, it's a plaster cast of these people last second. And there was a very famous one right there in the gift shop, which I think is a rather noble place for it. But when you come into the main gate, they called it the Tomb of the Maidens. And the Tomb of the Maidens for a long time was assumed to be a mother and her daughter. And if you look at it, Google it after we hang up, the embracing people, and you'll see one is holding the other, one has their hand in the other one's chest. And this is how they died. They were stuck in something called a cryptoporticus, which is basically just a covered tunnel. They were trying to get to the marina, hoping to get the last boat to Naples and get the hell out of Dodge before they didn't make it. And when they fell, they held each other tight. And they assumed I could, it must have been a mother and a daughter. And very much like with two of the brothers, when they came, did some DNA testing, which is the news on Friday. It was big news again on Friday because another test has gone looking at them. And they are two men, not related, and probably between 20 and 30 years old. Now we don't know if they're gay or not. We can't determine the behavior after 2,000 years. I look at these plaster casts, these people, these don't seem like some sort of strangers, a shopkeep and a tanner who just decided to hug each other at the last moment. These were two lovers in my mind who went out together and they held each other tight, two men. And that was the basis for my second book. So when Jared and his TV crew go back, they went to identify who these two lovers are. So their film is about tracking down in Pompeii's final hours who the embracing lovers are and giving them a name. And that's one of the things that impels the book forward. Will they find the embracing lovers in time to let them live again?
That actually sounds like a great story.
Thank you.
Right.
It's available on Amazon.
No, I'm serious. I might actually check it out. It sounds really,
Yeah,
really interesting.
please do. Let me know what you think.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so all the
Um,
books I bring in that, all the books I try to bring something about the history to it. Some of it has a gay theme, but it's also just a rollicking adventure where if you're straight or bi or anything in between, you can still have a fun show. It doesn't have to be, it's not political, It's just a love story wrapped up in a great historical tragedy.
right. Um, so obviously another thing that shaped your life, as you said, first for personal curiosity and then obviously for work as well, is just traveling in general. So traveling around the world has been a big part of your life. From what it sounds like, have you actually been to all continents? Because you've been to many places.
I haven't been to the Antarctica, no. I have not been to Australia or New Zealand.
Hmm,
So my list has to grow. Yeah, I say 70 some countries, but there's so many. I don't know how many countries there are. There's a great deal more than that. But no, I've not been everywhere. But certainly it's on the list. Trust me, I still have my bucket list, and I'm still ticking them off as I go.
yeah, I feel because that's one of my personal passions as well to just see as much as possible of this world and yeah, just seeing how much I can get that.
When you get out there and you realize, oh my God, we can't get it all. And I find I've gone back to some places now. My husband's younger than me. So as soon as we got together, I want to make sure that he saw Egypt and Turkey and the places that I love. So we now go back there. We have friends in those places. We go back there a lot sometimes. So it's not always disappearing in the internet. But we do always try to do something that takes us off to a new place. We went to Indonesia last year and climbed volcanoes there and all that stuff. We hadn't been to Java and we hadn't been to those places before. So we always try to like push ourselves a little bit. But of course, travel has changed so exponentially too that traveling is a lot easier than it was when I was backpacking through Iran 35 years ago. And it's for better or worse. It's a different world. So
Yes. So do you want to tell us about that? I mean, your first trip and then like you said, to the Middle East, which I could imagine as an American can be challenging. So how was that first backpacking trip into like Egypt, Syria, you mentioned Iran. Um,
they were
how was that
exhilarating.
for
They were
you?
absolutely exhilarating. I mean, they were life changing. And I think I met so many wonderful people. At no point did I feel intimidated or did I feel endangered. The people were embracing me. Small villages. Yeah, I remember, I think it was in Syria, Egypt. I was biking around and it's not some small villages. It was Egypt, South Egypt, down by Luxor. And some kids were chasing me. And kids always they want a pen and they want something. They're chasing me and they're yeah, mister, mister. And then this guy came out in a galabaya, which is the traditional dress, and he shooed them away. No, be nice, be nice. And he invited me to his house. They kept apologizing. No, they're just kids. I don't care. And he invited me in, and I could see he was just so touched to like help me out that I'm sitting there and talking to him. And he speaks no English, but he calls his son over who knows little English, probably because he works down in Luxor where the tourists are. And while we're sitting there talking to him, he's showing me around his little, it's a small house. I think it was a mud brick. I can't remember. It's been so long, but it looked like it could something from 15 to 18, AD. It could have been so far in the past. Wonderful people. And they had a goat and a donkey right in the front room behind
Mm.
a little fence. And as we're talking there, we sit outside and then I could smell meat roasting. Oh, you'll stay for dinner. I'm thinking, these people are poor. They have nothing. I don't want to cook. I can go back to the hotel and get something. They eventually come out with the goat. They killed their one goat for a traveler just to make sure I had a
Wow.
good time, partially to erase the bad experience I had with these children, which wasn't bad at all, but also because they would just wanted to offer great hospitality and make sure we remember their lovely village. They killed their goat. Got a lot of goat to eat, and believe me, I ate it because it was very rude not to. But that's the kind of one I can still see those guys' face. It's the kind of wonderful experiences you have traveling that you wouldn't have unless you risk it and go out there. I was not on the tourist trail. I was by myself on a bike path. I didn't meet anybody dangerous. I met somebody who killed half their livestock to feed me. Would the same
Personally.
thing happened in New York City? Probably not.
That's why I always love to hear these stories. Because everyone I talk about with that has traveled has stories like this, and people that never been abroad always, like you said, they have this fear, and for some reason they think, "Oh, it's going to be dangerous." But then, yeah, that's why I'm just so happy to hear your story as
Oh,
well. It's an
wonderful
amazing
story.
story.
And look, you have to be smart. I mean, I'm not saying everybody is ready to embrace you and, get the shirt off your back. But again, I've been in some rather questionable places and I've never, knock on wood, felt anyway anything but, just cared for. And you don't know that until you go out there. The media, my business has a lot to do with that, particularly news. They think the Middle East is dangerous. They think that any kind of foreign travel is dangerous. That, if you walk into a town, all they want is your liver, you're going to wake up with no liver the next day because they sold in the black market. So people are afraid, and it's a shame. It goes both ways. I was in Turkey a few months ago, and I was talking to a kebab shop, and some guy was practicing
Mm.
his English and heard us from New York. He goes, "Oh, New York, bang, 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 bang. What? Everybody die.
Oh wow.
Everybody shoot everybody." You probably like saw some old gangster movie from like Jimmy Cagney in 1938, and your idea of New York is still based on that. So it goes both ways. The misinformation is universal.
Yeah. Unfortunately, if it's foreign to us, the first thing we think about is fear and danger, and not it could be
Exactly,
interesting.
exactly. Stranger danger. Yeah.
But you already touched on the subject of the change, like the way travel changed. So it obviously become a lot easier. Do you find it in ways that it also has bad uh, bad sides that we
Yeah,
basically have all
I
this
hate to put a value
technology?
judgment on it. I mean, I get this question asked a lot, both from podcasts and just from people just talking about travel. And I don't want to put a value judgment because my time is different than someone else's time. A 22-year-old kid today, they're experiencing the world in the best way he or she can, just like I was when I did my first trip in 91 or whatever. So it's not a
Mm.
good or a bad to it. I think because I have the experience of the hindsight and know what it was like, I'm kind of glad I came of age and saw them then because having this mobile phone in your hand, it does everything for you. You can sit there and read the New York Times when you're lost in a small village rather than talk to some guy in his goat herder because you're down here reading about election results or whatever the hell has nothing to do with where you are. Or you can find your GPS and find your hotel and look at these. You can set it all up before you get there. Um, so it's easier to negotiate your own way. But then when you take all that away, you have to talk to people. You get lost. Yeah, it's scary. You have to ask. You don't know the language, but you have to kind of like go in there and negotiate and gesticulate wildly until you get it done. And we did have Lonely Planet guidebooks. I don't know they exist anymore. And they were often out of
Mm.
date. And you go to a hotel. I remember it was Turkey again. I remember it was a first trip to Turkey was so wonderful. A few years later, I want to go back with a friend or my husband. I can't remember what. And I wanted to go back to that same place. It was only 2 or 3 years later. And I had my Lonely Planet from the same year. And I said, "Oh, I know where this is." And I asked some guy when I got off the train station, I want to go to this one because they all, when if you know when you travel, they're all waiting for you. They want to get you the backpacker place. They want to be the
Mm.
first to get your 15 cents or whatever they're asking for. And I was down, I was absolutely says, I'm going to go to this place. I'm not going to fall for some cheap scam to get me some shitty hotel. I'm going to this place. And one guy kept saying, "Oh, don't go to that one. It burnt down. That one burnt down. You can't go there. Come to mine." That's a likely story, sir. So I
Mm.
huffed past him and trying to impress my friend. I'm taking the best place in town. Well, it burnt down. It didn't exist anymore. And the guy was standing right behind me. He's, "Want to go to my place?" "Yeah, let's go to your place."
Okay.
So, and if you had your phone, you would have known that long before you had that experience. But that's part of the
Right.
joy of just being yourself. Part of the wonderful thing about traveling is, what is it? No matter where you are, no matter where you go, there you are, which means you're still there. I'm still Neil Laird. If I'm wandering on a small Syrian village, I'm still the same Neil Laird that left Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania at age 18 or whatever. So you have to learn your own wits. You got to find your strengths. You got to get over your fears. You have to be able to talk to people and work things out. And when you look back, those are the accomplishments. You say, "I can't believe I did that. How did I get across the Iranian border like that? I was just a kid." And when anyone does it for you, when it's all done now and you can apply for a visa online, everyone picks you up and you get an Uber that takes you to the border, it's not quite you anymore. You're paying for someone else to do all the hard work. So do you have those
You're
experiences? They're rhetorical questions because, again, someone who's 22, I'm sure is having a blast right now wandering around these same places. They don't need the headaches that I had. It's easier sometimes just to get there and not worry about it. So this is their world, and I'm sure they're making the best of it. In 20, 30 years from now might be something different. You can teleport yourself there. Who knows how much easier you'll get. In my mind, I'm glad I traveled when I did before electronics came in.
yeah. I just always naturally also had this very romantic view of the past. So that's where my mind is kind of at
Yeah.
as well. But yeah, not wanting to put value on it, but arguably a lot of these places, especially Far East, especially Southeast Asia, has become just more tourist in general.
Yeah.
How do you think that has changed the travel experience as well?
I mean, that too is, it's one, of another in terms of what it means to people, what it means to tourists. Because I could go back to the place and say, "Oh, this place has gone to hell. It's now just a bunch of hotels along the beach. It's so depressing."
Mhm.
Going back to Vietnam after several years away, it's like, "Oh, it just became one more shopping mall." And it's so shit. But then I remember, gotta think, why do they do that? So these people now have shopping malls. They can sell things. They now have,
Right.
hotels they can make money off of. So yes, it's exploitation. And yes, I do think there's a negative to it. I'll go on the record and say I do think it's negative in terms of how they treat us and how we treat them, because now they see us often as walking ATMs in many cases. You don't have that guy in the field talking to you necessarily because they see you. "Oh, yeah, you're someone from America. I know you have money lined in your pocket. Let's get it." Because they're told to think that way. Commerce has overtaken all the corners of the world. And we, of course, expect
Yeah.
those creature comforts too. So we go to a town, "Oh, it's a bit grotty. I don't want to stay here. It's not quite as charming as the one up the street." So we're judging things on what the Disneyfied version of the past is. We all want kind of like, the Luxor Hotel in Egypt as opposed to Luxor Hotel in Vegas, as opposed to, the Luxor in Egypt, because it's like we kind of want the candified version. So man, so I think that's a big negative. I do think it's a big negative. But what can you do? You can't stop
Yeah.
progress.
Yeah. That's the thing. We're at this point, so
You can't put it
it's
back in.
never gonna
You
go
can't
back.
take away somebody's hotel or say, "Oh, I wanted to." There's a story that when I first shipped again Egypt. I go back to Egypt a lot. Forgive me, but I remember I was doing a felucca
It's
ride.
fine.
You can still do it as a tourist, and a felucca is a sailboat. And if you fly, this is still the same tourist route you did when I did it first time. You go all the way down to Aswan, which is the furthest city, almost down by the Sudan border, and you get a felucca, and it's beautiful. You sail up the Nile, and you sleep out on a flat boat, and you get up in the morning, you go see some ruins, and keep going on. And I remember on the first trip, they took us to a Nubian village, and it was It looked again like something that was from 100 years earlier. It was just mud brick and such. But as we walk up the path, they flicked on all these bright Christmas lights. And and they're excited because the tourist boat had been there. And suddenly it looked like, I don't know, Macy's Christmas. And it just looked really garish. And all the light kind of ruined it. I wanted to see candlelight. And stuff. I remember telling my guide saying, "Oh, it's sort of disappointing. It kind of takes away the charm." And he looked at me and he was trying to keep it in, but he politely says, "These people have been trying to get electricity in this village for 50 years. Up until last year, they didn't have electricity. They didn't have any gas. They now can sit outside at nighttime." So you're basically saying, just because you're
Right.
here for 2 nights and you want to see your beautiful, medieval village so you could take pictures of it and go back home, these people live here. And what you see as ruining a perfect snapshot to them is progress. So you have to take both sides of it and recognize, yes, something is given up and that sense of the past is lost. But yet, are these people supposed to stay in the past for our own benefit just so we can have a fun holiday?
No,
We have electricity. Why shouldn't they?
that's a great point. Yeah, obviously. Yes. Uh, Talking about change and progress. To bring it back to TV, I'm pretty sure that whole field and that whole business must have undergone or is undergoing change as well. Do you feel that in your work um, as well? Has that changed like how you go at filming things, the whole business side of it?
Yeah, it's exponential change, and a lot of friends are out of business, are out of work because streaming has changed the business exponentially forever. And people say, "Well, how can that be? Because there's now more shows than ever before." But keep in mind, I work in a very small corner. I work in nonfiction television, and I used to work in a network called Science Channel. We had 4 or 5 hours, or 4 or 5 nights a week of archaeology or engineering or space programming. So 40 hours of fresh material every week on this. Science Channel died last year, and now the streamings has like one night where they put 1 hour on. So not only
Right.
are thousands of people out of work who make the kind of shows I did, the budgets have shrunk because they have to make sure they fit that one little time slot. And the people don't watch them when you're competing on one network, Max or HBO, whatever, against Game of Thrones. What's going to do better, a Game of Thrones or a 2 hour documentary about the fall of the Bronze Age? So they're making less of those specialty shows because they're not buzzy enough, they're not big enough, and the budgets don't justify all the international shooting. So they're dying. That the kind of stuff that I have done for so long, they still make them, but far, far less and far more restrictions. And you need co-production now. So we had to get money from Australia and ZDF, NHK and Plus and BBC. Everybody puts in 50K as opposed to paying the entire thing. So it takes longer to get the funding for it. It's a bit of a slog. And I think a lot of people are getting out of the business because it's not what they went into so many years ago. They're just not making those kind of factual programs that so many of us loved. Another reason
Right.
I write books. It's cheaper to write a book.
It's a good way to portray knowledge as well, though, or like entertainment slash knowledge. It's a good medium
I've
for
gotten to a
that.
point now. The books are also fun because I'm able to take what I've gleaned from my years as a documentary filmmaker or just study. The first book, Primetime Travelers, instead of Pompeii, their goal was they have to negotiate the 12 hours of the Egyptian underworld and look for a lost mummy or they can't get back to the modern world. And if you look at all the strange things on a pharaoh's tomb, they have all these strange things, snakes chasing you around and lakes of fire and mummies coming after you. Those are all different gates of the 12 gates of nighttime. There's 12 hours a day and 12 hours a night. So basically what a pharaoh's tomb was almost like a spaceship where they went for the 12 hours of the hell, the duat they called it, before they could rise again and survive. So I took that mythology and I put a film crew in. But I know my 12 gates of the duat so well that I can rely just on what each gate does and what the challenges of each gate. Each gate has a guardian that won't let you pass. You have to get past the sentry. You could die at each gate. So I took that and I turned it into an adventure up, which I don't think anyone's ever done before. But I could do that because I know Egyptian mythology so well. It was a breeze.
Yeah. Is actually writing these kind of books, is that also sort of a way because in archaeology, obviously we see how the things are now and we can imagine back. But by writing the books, you basically take the reader, I suppose, directly into when it was still great, when it was still like blooming. So is that part of it as well, just throwing them
Part of
into
it is
this?
was the main part of it. One of the people asked me, "Why did you start writing fiction?" Because I was a nonfiction guy. Because after a while, you can look at so many bloody bleached stones standing in the murk. I wanted to see when it was had a pillar, when it was painted gold, and King Tut was coming
Yeah.
down on a chariot. And the only way you do that is create fiction because there is no time travel. And the fact that I'm doing time
Yeah.
travel or fantasy, I would roll my eyes at 10 years ago, thinking like, "Oh, that's so low end." You can stick to the facts. I want to go there. I want to see what the Duat is like. I don't believe in the Egyptian gods, but I can create that in a book, or I can take you on an amazing adventure where you run the 12 hours of hell. We know it's fantastical, but I want to see it. And it's so much fun to writing it and bring it to life. Pompeii, I studied those 3 hours, 3 days of the eruption before it happened. It was all written down by a couple people, Pliny the Younger mostly, after the fact. So we kind of know what happened day by day. So I took all the dry facts of the eruption and when the stones fell, when the fires came, and when the first plume came, and I was able to use that and put that into a fun narrative. It took me back. So I am taking you not
Yeah.
to the ruins of Troy or the ruins of ancient Pompeii, but Pompeii on the eve of its destruction. And it's a fun thing to do.
Yeah. It sounds fun just talking about it. I'm getting more and more excited.
It's fun to bring that to life because again, it's like I think I'm pretty good in my writing at painting a picture and kind of creating. So, first of all, when everyone steps out of that time, imagine you open a door and you're in the ancient ruins of Pompeii, and then suddenly you open the door and you're back in say 9 AD, and they're walking around, anything's new and everything is different, and that's how you, the reader, is feeling. So having time travel is a good hook because we can relate to it
Yeah.
in a way where we are that film. And we step out of that portal into ancient Rome or ancient Greece, we are them, like the crew. So it's fun to create those worlds and shock people and talk about the cool facts that I know about ancient Roman society and put them in there because I know you as a modern person will be just as fascinated as my characters that I create because you live in the same world.
Yeah. Um, Maybe if we can talk about writing in general, because that's also actually something I'm passionate about. I've tried writing a couple of times. Um, how was that process for you? Was that something you were kind of familiar for a longer time, or did you just have this passion and then just kind of get into the writing process? How did that
It's a very good
come?
question. And I think if I'd known then what I know now, I probably would have done it because it's been one hell of a journey. I was presumptuous in thinking, well, I'm a TV producer. I know cause and effect and cliffhangers and signposting. All I got to do is write it on paper. It's a different storytelling all over. My first drafts, the book that came out is my third novel. I wrote two others that I couldn't sell. And the first one, I can see why. Although it's an adventure story, it's very much what we're talking about. It takes place all in ancient Egypt. And it's a fascinating story. It's about the world's oldest known court case and crime ever recorded. A group of tomb robbers who got caught sneaking into a pharaoh's tomb. And they actually happened to be tomb builders. They snuck in because they built it. They knew all the booby
Uh,
traps. They knew how to get around it. So it was about them during a famine during Egypt during the 20th dynasty when things were collapsing. And they go in there to try to save their family by stealing the pharaoh's goods. And I think it's still I might go back and revisit again, look at it. I haven't in years, but I think what tripped me up was I was too much the historian. There were probably 16 pages describing, how the tomb was carved and how they would paint it and where they would the line and mortar, and less of the drama because I was still a documentarian trying to find my voice. So it took me a while to kind of find that through line and recognize there's world building, but there's also pulling back and letting you, the reader, imagine it yourself. And that doesn't come natural. Dialogue. And a lot of my scripts also felt very much like a screenplay and not a lot of tags. A tag would be like, he looked at him curiously and shook his head. That's a tag. Mine was just like,
Mm.
where do you want to go? Let's go here. Let's go there. Almost like a blueprint. Because again, I'm used to movies and I'm used to documentaries. So it's a whole new language I had to learn. I mean, God bless the person if he or she can sit down and crank out a perfect best-selling novel on their first draft or their first attempt. It's like learning a second language, and it took me several books until I started to get fine. And I think the reason that I pivoted towards what I do, because write what you know, right? So the book's very comedic too. It's very sort of jokey. There's gay characters. It's about a film crew. There's a bunch of Neil Laird in those books. Yet there's also the ancient Egypt and ancient Rome and ancient Greece and the things I love too that I can bring to it. So I brought the stuff I had, and yet I didn't lose sight of my voice. I didn't lose sight of what makes Neil Laird as a storyteller unique. And it took me a while to find that. It's not a
Yeah,
documentary. You are creating characters in a world, an internal voice. And that is a very, very different creative process.
those were really, really good insights into the journey as well. So something I can take away from that as well. Um, looking into the future, what do you think is that something you've found yourself now writing these fiction novels, or is it trying to do more documentaries? Where's your heart at the moment?
Both, both. I love both. I haven't given up documentaries. I've gone back to the freelancing world because of all the constrictions in television and network jobs. So I'm more selective when I do. But my happy place would be able to make a few of those films every year and have a bunch of things in development and then go off and write a book. It's not a great
Right.
money in novel writing. I mean, you can get in, hopefully the audience will build and people will find the novels. That's why I do podcasts like this. If I can pick up 2 or 3 more listeners who will go off and buy the book and they talk about it and they buy the series. Oh, I like Primetime Travelers. I'm going to pick up Primetime Pompeii. It's building that. It takes time. But I also recognize it is not something that's going to bring in millions and millions. So I'm not going to quit my day job. And my day job is television. And I still enjoy television. And after 30 odd years, I think I'm pretty good at it. But
Yeah.
I want to do different things. I did it because I wanted different things. I want to tell stories in a different way. That's why I wrote my first novel.
Well, Neil, we already had a very interesting conversation. I feel like we learned a lot. You took us into your passion. You shared a lot of nice experiences with us. So, if you just want to tell the people now that they're intrigued, if they want to look into your books, look into your documentaries, find out more about you, um, just let us know where we can find out more.
Sure, yeah, happy to. Yeah, my books are both published on Amazon and Kindle. So if you Google Neil Laird or Primetime Travelers or Primetime Pompeii, they'll come up and one will link to the other. And I don't know when this airs, but I'm currently writing the third book, Primetime Troy, which takes them back to the Trojan War. So you get to meet Achilles and Agamemnon and that all lot in the next book. And, so I keep the series going. And then neillaird.com and my documentaries are all over the place. I can't say where they're going to be, but if you watch the names go by very fast at the end, you say, I think that said Neil Laird. So you Google me, I'll show up.
Perfect. Um, I'm very excited about the Troy book as well.
So am
Um,
I. I'm still in the middle of that one. I'm still working on that one, but I think I have a good hook.
nice. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for letting me pick your brain. And yeah, was a good time. Enjoy the rest of your day. And with that,
Likewise, not at all. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you for having me. And now, yeah, I can go to bed and you can start. Your day's already half over, right? So
yeah, that's like being in different parts of the world.
that's travel, man. That's the beauty of travel. And here we are talking. We could have done this in 1991 on my first trip, right? I have to send you a letter you would have gotten 16 months later. You said, "Who the hell is Neil Laird?" So thank you. Thank you for having me on. It's been a great pleasure.
Benji Neil. And bye, everyone.